I recently saw Dune Part 2, the hotly anticipated sequel to the 2021 breakout hit. I saw it opening weekend back home with some friends and family. My brother specifically is a huge Dune fan. He's read all the books, even way before the adaptation was announced. I asked him how he was feeling before we watched the sequel.
All right, so we're heading into Dune 2. Jay, you're the biggest fan here. What were your feelings? Are you excited?
Yeah, I think that correctly describes how I'm feeling.
Are you nervous about it as a sequel?
No, I have complete trust in the director.
That's good. All right.
As we paced to the back of the Cineplex through long, brightly carpeted hallways, I noticed almost every promotion poster flanking us was for an upcoming sequel, including the IMAX theater we stepped into. Sequels, they are seemingly everywhere. Are they a plague on our cinematic society brought upon by dollar-hungry conglomerates? Or are they just a reflection of what we want as fans? Today, I'm discovering the history of sequels, why they keep getting made, and why they matter. You're watching Least Important Things. I'm your host, Luke Ferris. Sequels are as old as cinema itself. The Great Train Robbery is one of the most recognized silent moving pictures. But did you know that it has a sequel just 2 years later in 1905 called The Little Train Robbery? The Fall of a Nation, released in 1916, is arguably the first feature-length sequel. It followed 1915's Birth of a Nation due to its popularity of the time. In the 1920s, silent serials continued episodic storytelling, but it really wasn't until the 1950s that sequels started to become a commonplace in cinema. Genres like animation, horror, and science fiction rehash characters and plots across studios. My episode on Hammer Films, a British horror production company, showcased how little these studios thought, planned, and budgeted for these sequels.
Even before the film was finished, an ill-fated sequel began on the same set.
But we start with a title. We think to ourselves, what's a good title? And we think, To Love a Vampire. And so then we make a poster. And with this poster, I go around and see these distributors and say to them, how would you like to have a picture called To Love a Vampire? And they say, oh, wonderful, when can I have it? So I say, well, perhaps you could deliver it in about 6 months' time. And I say, you want to see a script, or do you want to know who's in it? And they say, no, don't bother.
In the 1980s, blockbuster sequels like The Empire Strikes Back and Temple of Doom, The Empire Strikes Back and Temple of Doom, and Temple of Doom led to trilogies. And slasher series like Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street resurrected the fast sequel strategy by Hammer Horror. This developed into the franchise tag in the 90s and 2000s, which we now know today or label as IP, intellectual property. IP is the legal definition of published stories, including characters, locations, titles, etc., that a corporation can license or make products from. IP today includes everything from kids' toys to board games to theme park rides and books. All of these franchises and IP are in the business of making sequels. But there are different types of sequels than just the next sequential movie. So let's break it down. We have the direct sequel, the most common. It's typically unplanned for but hoped for. Example being Toy Story 2. Toy Story 1, they didn't expect to be able to do a sequel. They probably hoped for it. And then they were able to make Toy Story 2 because of the success of the first Toy Story. Next, we have prequels, which tells a backstory. This typically happens after multiple sequels. For example, Star Wars Episode 1 is a prequel to the original Star Wars. Next is the midquel. This started to happen more in the 2000s thanks to Lord of the Rings. You have the Hobbit series, Hunger Games, Twilight, Harry Potter. A midquel is typically filmed in sequence or together of a trilogy or a larger set of films. And then we have the spin-off sequel, where a character from the original film or series gets their own separate story. One of the best examples of this is Hobbs and Shaw from the Fast and Furious franchise. And then we have remakes, which is exactly how it sounds. It's a recreation of an original film, but with a new cast and sometimes with story changes. This was really popular in the early 2000s and 2010s. Point Break 2015, a film I will not see, is an example of this, where they took the storyline, new actors, and changed a little bit of the action sports sequence. How dare they? And finally, we have a relatively new terminology for a sequel, which is a requel or legacy sequel. This is typically where you have a gap in production of the films and you bring back original characters. The new Ghostbuster film or Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny is a great example of a legacy sequel or requel. Another term you'll see thrown out is reboot. I don't really necessarily think that's a sequel term. I look at that as more of a strategy by a studio to restart a property with a new sequel. So a reboot could be a remake, a spin-off, a legacy sequel, or a requel. It's more of an action term, a verb of sequels. Are you confused yet? Let's stay in the horror genre here for a moment because I think the Halloween franchise captures every aspect of the sequel. The series is made up of 13 films in 5 different timelines. All right, stick with me here. We have the Carpenter timeline, which is the original Halloween, and Halloween 2, which is direct sequel. And then following, we have Halloween 4, 5, and 6. Next is the Halloween 3 timeline, a spin-off without Michael Myers. Next is the H2O timeline, which is Halloween 1, 2, Halloween H2O, which is the 7th Made, which is a legacy sequel before the term existed, and Halloween Resurrection, the 8th film in the series. And then we have the Rob Zombie timeline, which is Halloween 2007, a remake and a prequel, and Halloween 2, 2009, another direct sequel. And then finally, we have the Gordon Green timeline, which is Halloween 2018, a reboot and legacy sequel, and Halloween Kills, a midquel, and then Halloween Ends. So why are there so many Halloween sequels? I think Dustin McNeil and Travis Mullins explain it best in their exhaustive book on the franchise called Taking Shape. 4 decades later, it's difficult to find anything to say about Halloween that hasn't been said before, like Casablanca, The Searchers, or Jaws. It's one of those rare perfect films. Perhaps that's why we still bother with sequels, remakes, and clones. We know the odds aren't good, but we still hold hope that the lightning might strike twice. Even if it doesn't, we'll always have the original. 40 years later, its raw power has yet to diminish. It's both the audience's craving for more and the financial potential that makes a sequel inevitable. The business model of a sequel just makes sense. For example, if movie A made double what it spent to make, then we can make a sequel to movie A. Let's call it movie B. And if movie B makes 20% less than movie A, we'll still be profitable. And if we make movie B on a tighter budget than movie A, we'll have even more wiggle room. This business strategy is why there are so many Halloween sequels, and why in the 90s and 2000s, Disney created a bunch of straight-to-DVD animation sequels of their most iconic theater films like Little Mermaid and Pocahontas, on the cheap. Seems simple, right? Without having to spend any extra effort creating a brand new story, you can guarantee carryover loyalty from the first film. And for most of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, this worked, and even if the sequels didn't delight audiences like the original, the studios still made money. Take U.S. Marshals, a sequel to the surprise Oscar buzz thriller The Fugitive, or Hannibal, the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. Both sequels failed to live up to the prestige of the original, but both were profitable. But if sequels, even pretty good ones, made enough financial sense to make another one, the consistency, quality, and care dipped by the 3rd or 4th installment. The sequel drop-off left stories shuttered, characters forgotten, and fans unsatisfied. And then 3 IPs changed everything. First is the Lord of the Rings trilogy, released every year from 2001 to 2003. And one of the riskiest film projects in movie history, Peter Jackson simultaneously created 3 movies, hoping to avoid the drop-off curse. The trilogy's success spurred studios to gamble big on more properties like Harry Potter, Twilight, and gave investors a longer-term view of what a packaged trilogy could be, like the Bourne trilogy, The Matrix, X-Men, and Spider-Man. Then 2008 happened. Now, if your requel or sequel gains a larger audience over time and is very popular, movie B will most likely outperform the previous film. That's why Batman Begins, which was a reboot strategy, didn't have as much fanfare because its predecessor was Batman and Robin 7 years earlier. Whereas The Dark Knight had high anticipation and expectations because of the surprise success of Batman Begins. I noticed this trend in both rewatch series we did here on Lit for the Mission Impossible franchise and Jurassic Park franchise. The popularity of the predecessor directly influenced the box office numbers of the next film, no matter how well it was regarded, good or bad. This is a strategy that Marvel Studios perfected over the decade after the release of Iron Man, which came out the same year as The Dark Knight. Marvel proceeded to make a bunch of tied together sequels, and even if a movie busted like The Incredible Hulk or Thor 2, the studio was able to pay back tenfold once they teamed up for the Avengers. The promised success of the sequel and world building that Marvel showcased spawned a new era of sequels, where studios started scraping their historical IP to return retired franchises to give them one more shot at a sequel. Marvel was so successful at this strategy that at their peak, it really didn't matter what Marvel movie was coming out. People were going to show up in hordes, and they were going to make a lot of money. Now, this strategy since has proven not to work so well, but they had a pretty good run. Now we are living in a world where every billboard or movie poster that you see is probably going to be a sequel. We are really living in an endless cycle of sequels. Let's go back to taking shape. The authors described the catch-22 for the creators of the first Halloween, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, about making Halloween 2. As Carpenter recalls it, they were strong-armed into returning to Haddonfield. Quoting Carpenter now, "We were literally forced into making a sequel because of business considerations. The sequel was going to be made with us or without us. And part of the reason for making the sequel was to get the money that was owed to both Deborah and I from the first film. Being nice capitalists, we decided to go ahead and do that." All right, we just got out of Dune. How are we feeling, friends?
Sweaty.
They did it again, baby.
100%.
Pretty good sequel.
I need a beverage.
Pretty good sequel.
Pretty good.
Just the beginning. Just the
It was nice.
beginning.
It was a nice movie.
We got a lot to go. A lot to go.
In the moments after watching Dune Part 2, my brother and I realized that this wasn't the end of Villeneuve's vision. In fact, this sequel was just the conclusion of the first book, packaged book by Frank Herbert, and in fact another sequel, Dune Messiah, was going to be part of this film trilogy. The irony is that the third film will focus on the second book, the true sequel to the story. But we weren't dissuaded by another installment because what we just experienced was so thrilling itself. This is the hook of the sequel. It's what makes us want to come back for more. And studios are maximizing this at a generational level. There are 3 generations of Star Wars trilogies, let alone spin-off sequels, etc., that kids, parents, grandparents, all can go see together. Just like the loyalty of sports fans, moviegoers are following their franchises and passing along their fandom to the next generation. As adult fans, we should be, or we are, smart enough to know that this is part of a business strategy, part of this big movie IP machine. But sometimes we can't help it. Every time I'm like, another Marvel movie, I'm ecstatic for the new installment of Mission Impossible. We crave the next step in the story. It's inherent in us. We want to see our favorite characters on screen just one more time, one last time. We want to root on our franchises in the next sequel. And it's easy to be critical of the massive sequels that are generated by studios that fall short of our expectations as fans. But I think we're all holding out for those rare moments when the next one is more than we expected. We need the anticipation of a sequel like we need the anticipation of a vacation. So sequels aren't going away anytime soon, and IP is a strategy that will continue to go on with studios and corporations. However, if we continue to get innovative adaptations like Dune or a smart reworking on a property like Barbie, the quality of sequels will hopefully continue to be better and better as we expect them to be better and better as fans. Either way, sequels are a quintessential part of the movie-going experience. One that is complicated, convicting, and like Dune Part 2, can still have you walking out of a movie theater wanting more. Thanks for watching Least Important Things. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all the things, and you can listen to an audio version by subscribing to Least Important Things wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for watching, friends. This is my first video version of a podcast episode. I'm trying this out. Let me know what you think. If you've never even listened or watched the show, thank you for doing that. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Least Important Things. Visit leastimportantthings.com. If you want to get involved, follow me on social media at Luke H. Ferris, TikTok at Least Important Things. Visit our website, leastimportantthings.com, to get involved in the next episode. Thanks again for watching. This was fun.